So what if the world as you know it isn't what it seems at all? That's really the question at the heart of some pretty startling claims from a guy who was in a position to know secrets, Paul Hellyer, the former defense minister of Canada. He says what he saw from inside the government has pushed him to issue a really grave warning, and tonight we're going to unpack exactly what he's talking about.
Right off the bat, this is a statement that sets the whole stage. See, Hellyer isn't just talking about everyday politics or economics. Nope. He's alleging there's a hidden power structure pulling all the strings behind the curtain. I mean, that's a huge claim from a high-ranking official, and he warns it's all moving towards something he calls the end game.
Okay, so to even begin to understand this grander scheme, Hellyer says we have to start with what he calls the single most urgent issue in the world today: money. He argues that the way our financial system actually works is the key to unlocking everything, and it's a system very, very few of us truly get.
And here is Hellyer's first big point. This one's a bit of a mind-bender. We all think of money as, cash in our wallets, coins in our pockets, but he claims that physical money only makes up about 3% of all the money out there. The rest of it, a whopping 97%, is what he calls virtual money. It doesn't physically exist anywhere, it's just data, an entry in a computer.
And this, right here, brings us to the absolute central question of his whole theory. If most money is basically just information stored on a computer, well, then the real power belongs to whoever controls that computer, right? So who gets to create that data?
So here's how Hellyer claims it works in the real world. Let's say you want to buy a car, and it costs $35,000. You go to a private bank. Now he says the bank doesn't just lend you money that some other person deposited. No. Instead, once they've got your collateral and you've signed on the dotted line, they literally just type some numbers into a computer and poof, $35,000 shows up in your account. That money, he alleges, was just created right there out of thin air as a debt.
And this is where Hellyer says the whole system is just fundamentally broken. The bank creates the principal of the loan, that's the $35,000, but the money you need to pay back the interest on that loan, it's never created. Just think about that for a second. If you scale that up globally, it means there is always more debt in the system than there is money in existence. It forces this constant, never-ending cycle of more and more borrowing just to keep the whole thing from collapsing.
So if that's the how the system works, this next part gets to the who. This is where Hellyer points the finger and directly names the groups he believes are not just benefiting from this whole setup, but are actually in control of it. Now, before we get to his list, let's just quickly define the term. A cabal is really just a secret group of people, a clique, that's united in some kind of common scheme, usually a political one. It implies there's a hidden agenda and they're all working together, completely out of the public eye. So who does Hellyer say is in this cabal? Well, he puts the international banking cartel right at the very top. They're the ones who create the debt-based money system after all. He says working with them are the big oil cartels, who control the world's energy. Then you've got the huge transnational corporations with all their money and influence. He even lists key U.S. intelligence agencies and a big chunk of the American military. He alleges they are all working in concert toward the same goal.
This quote, supposedly from President Bill Clinton to a reporter, really gets to the core of what Hellyer's saying. It suggests that even the person in the highest office in the land isn't actually in full control. And that raises a pretty chilling question. If the president isn't really in charge, who is?
Which, of course, leads us to the next logical question. If this powerful cabal actually exists, what are they trying to do? What's their ultimate goal? According to Hellyer, they've been working for decades toward a very specific objective, something he calls the end game.
And there it is, stated pretty plainly. The end game, according to Paul Hellyer, is basically a system of total global control. It's a kind of new world order that isn't democratic, it's not elected, but is managed directly by the very bankers and elites he claims are sitting at the top of this cabal. All right, now we're about to get into the most speculative and, let's be honest, the weirdest part of Hellyer's warning. He believes that to finally achieve this endgame, the cabal has one last massive deception planned for every single one of us.
To explain this, Hellyer brings up a warning he says came from the famous rocket scientist Wernher von Braun. The idea is simple. This massive military-industrial complex needs a constant enemy to justify its gigantic budgets and its power. And if a real enemy isn't around, well, you just have to invent one. So, according to Hellyer, von Braun actually predicted a whole sequence of these manufactured enemies. First, he said it was the Russians during the Cold War. Next up, global terrorists. And the final card left to play, the ultimate enemy that could unite the entire world against a single common threat,
would be extraterrestrials.
And this is where Hellier tries to connect this wild theory to things happening right now. He points to these strange public comments, like President Obama just casually saying aliens are real, and then President Trump's reaction wasn't to deny it, but to say Obama was leaking classified info. For people who believe this theory, these are little clues being dropped, breadcrumbs being seeded into our minds.
And all of this builds to the climax of his warning. Hellier's fear is a scenario where a mock attack is staged, an event carefully designed to look just like an alien invasion, creating enough fear and chaos for the public to accept martial law and the final push to lock in that endgame system of control.
So that's where we land. Are these the credible warnings of a former defense minister? A guy with access to top secrets who's trying to blow the whistle on a plan that's been in the works for decades? Or is this just an incredibly elaborate conspiracy theory? A fantastic story pieced together from suspicions and strange events? That really is the question Paul Hellier's story leaves us all with.